Hello, dear friends. I'm back. I'm going to do a couple of videos today uh, because I had some things I wanted to get out of the way before they became too dated. Uh, this one I'm going to devote to this week in the MCMU. So will probably be the last one of these. I do for quite a while. I've only done these ever sporadically at most when there was news coinciding with something I had to say specifically about something MCU related that was running, usually a Disney Plus television series. So uh, most of the attention this week, as we come up on tomorrow the 5th, which is the opening evening of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. The discourse is filling the air with that one. Marvel's pumping out about 5 million last minute trailers, all of about 30 seconds to a minute long, and clips. And it seems like everyone I've seen has at least one or two shots that we have not seen prior. So they're really trying to jam as much as possible at you, kind of like they did with Spider Man No Way Home. The one thing they haven't included in these clips, they have included, first, let me say, further confirmation of the existence of an MCU version of that oddly popular contemporary Marvel Universe concept, the Illuminati, created by Brian Michael Bendis in the dark days of the Civil War uh, comic arc. Uh, the movie vastly improved on the comic by Mark Millar, I felt. Uh, but that little Millar Bendis era, like 2006 ish, that was kind of the end of me and Marvel as far as collecting. Um, just a little too cynical storytelling strategies for me, but the younger people who, are enamored of the idea, uh, who, don't really realize how um, problematic the whole Illuminati retcon was as far as the overarching old continuity of Marvel before they squished the universes in the 2010s, a la Crisis on Infinite Earths. And they very much just completely ripped off the concept of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Some argue they should have done it many years earlier. Some argue they should have just kept one streamlined universe. But it's too late now. It's all out of the bag, and Marvel has echoed DC in its embrace of the multiverse as a concept, which that was one of DC's major distinguishing features to its continuity prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, which boiled us down to one universe, and gave a lot of room to kind of start fresh. Um, but now DC has a multiverse again. And now Marvel doesn't, I guess, or has a limited multi. I don't know. I didn't read that whole Secret War series. I did like the Cliff Notes thing. I watched it on Comics Explained, his channel. Um, Again, it's contemporary comic storytelling by Marvel that I don't particularly react to, resonate with. But my point, my long point, is that you know there's a whole generation that has come up with the Illuminati as this major concept, uh, and whatever. So the decision was made apparently to change the Illuminati from a group of earthbound beings who were kind of leaders in their fields slash most brilliant men slash kings of outlying nations like Wakanda, Attila, and Atlantis. And they were going to make the behind the scenes decisions. Of course, that made no sense because they would have been employed many times over the years when they weren't. Um, so yeah, it really doesn't hold up upon close inspection. But it looks like they decided to adapt this concept into the MCU with by making them kind of a multiversal quorum or council with some of the same characters, some of the same things being represented, and all of these characters are from all different universes within the multiverse. And we learned in a leak, a Marvel leak a few days ago that we confirmed who all was in the Illuminati. The recent clips, of course, pretty much confirmed that Patrick Stewart was going to be playing Professor Charles Xavier, a multiversal version of him, an alternate universe version to the ones seen in the X-Men movies. I don't know if his appearance is in any way reconcilable with any of the X-Men films, very fragmented continuity line. Certainly not with Logan or, certainly not with Logan, which was supposed to be the last time Mr. Stewart essayed that role. I'm glad to see him back. I think this is really the only way you could kind of have your cake and eat it too, is have Xavier in the MCU, in an MCU film before Patrick Stewart just gets too damn old. And I'm glad that fandom woke up and came to the realization that I did immediately, that Stewart was really the only Charles Xavier. This whole 3 or 4 movies, how many were there? 4 lackluster, well, 1 mediocre and 3 lackluster films starring McAvoy as Charles Xavier, one of which also featured Stewart as well via time travel. There's like First Class, Days of Future Past, the mediocre one, and then I don't know, Apocalypse, Dark Phoenix. It just doesn't matter anymore. McAvoy was terrible in the role, and the direction of him was terrible. The writing for him was terrible, and he didn't even resemble the character cosmetically until the 4th film. I have a very low opinion of that offshoot of the X-Men continuity. So I think, Logan came around and they're like, well, hold on, this is Patrick Stewart, he's Xavier. And now it's kind of like, yeah, he's Xavier. Let's just fucking face it. So it doesn't really matter how old Xavier is. He's always been portrayed in the films anyway as significantly older than the other characters, with the exception of Magneto, who is, fairly hard to kill, and of course Wolverine, who is nigh immortal. But as in the comic books, Professor Xavier is one of this version of the Illuminati, as he was in that one. Also, they've incorporated Captain Carter, which really should be called Captain Britain, the live-action iteration of the What If animated show character voiced by the same woman who has always played Peggy Carter, Haley Atwell. I always like seeing Haley Atwell. This is an okay, viable, alternate character within this structure. Captain America was, in recent years, revealed to have been at one time in the comic books a member of the Illuminati, but he was kicked out because he just had too much ethics. But there was no sense in him being in the Illuminati in the first place, based on what it was conceived to be. He was always going to be an antithesis or even a nemesis of their kind of often dubious moral manipulations, usually the ones carried out by Tony Stark and Reed Richards, who were kind of the big arrogant villains of the Illuminati. Again, that's a modern conception, a modern construct for this past generation. Those characterizations of Reed, of Tony, and especially of Reed, did not exist prior to the early 2000s. So for 40 years, these two men were, yes, flawed, but they were heroic. Not the case anymore. Marvel has tried to kind of redeem Reed in the comic books during the Jason Aaron FF run, which is probably the best run they've had in many years. And I know a lot of that is going to be incorporated into the coming Fantastic Four MCU material. And it looks like that take on Reed is the one that they're choosing for this Illuminati for Doctor Strange, too. So a lot of people suggested, oh, well, Eon Grofode, or however you pronounce his name, from the two horrible, in my opinion, Tim Story Fantastic Four films, should come back because he played him before. It's an alternate universe. I mean, look what they did with Tobey Maguire coming back, and Andrew Garfield coming back, and Willem Dafoe coming back, and Jamie Foxx coming back, and Alfred Molina coming back, and all reprising their roles from other universes in Spider-Man No Way Home. So everybody's like, yeah, this is going to be great. So they did it with Xavier, and I just explained the reasons, really. He's too iconic at this juncture to recast, I believe. Just as, to me, Molina and Dafoe were too iconic to be recast in their respective roles. Well, they didn't go with Eon Grofode, and I think that was an intelligent aesthetic decision, though I know it rankles a lot of fanboys who are just getting accustomed to, oh my God, now we're going to see Nicolas Cage as Ghost Rider and Wesley Snipes as Blade. There's going to be constant reprisals and cross-universe, which I think the specialness of it will wear thin very quickly. I hope that this film, given the nature of it as being Doctor Strange and his story is always being reality bending to some extent, and that's kind of part and parcel of his character, is him coming to a place kind of maybe beyond, outside of the multiverse, kind of like the Time Variance Authority was in Loki, maybe an adjunct to it as the base of the Illuminati. It makes more sense that Doctor Strange, who apparently screwed up and let the cat out of the bag with the multiverse in the Spider-Man film, would be called to task by such a multiversal governance board of wise people represented from different universes. And like I said, one of them is Peggy Carter from the What If universe, who again, should be called Captain Britain, but is Captain Carter. Essentially a female Captain America. She got the, super soldier formula instead of Steve. That's acceptable to me, given that, like I said, Captain America was briefly a member of the Illuminati in the comics, however foolish an idea that was. And plus, there needs to be more women. There were no women in the original Illuminati. I don't even know if there were any British people. Another one is Monica Rambeau, her version of Captain Marvel, being an alternate to the MCU's Carol Danvers Captain Marvel. And of course, in the comic books, Monica Rambeau, in a white and black costume with the full powers of Captain Marvel that are evinced by somewhat by Carol in the MCU, and then somewhat later in the Marvel Universe in the comic books by Monica under the names Photon and Pulsar. They kept changing it. That character has existed, so making that character an alternate to the mainline MCU Monica, who has now acquired those powers in WandaVision, and will no doubt become Photon or Pulsar or whatever. Wasn't her mother's call sign Photon or something like that in the Captain Marvel film? Making Monica Rambeau the alternate Captain Marvel makes total sense. And again, more women. And again, it's somebody very powerful. They've established whoever Captain Marvel is in the MCU as being very high on the totem pole of power. So it goes beyond just brilliance, but it also is, in her case, power, a level of power, maybe level of cosmic awareness, perhaps, to throw out an old Captain Marvel concept from Marvel. And in the case of Haley Atwell, you could argue the brilliance because she pretty much, founded S.H.I.E.L.D. So you could say, therefore, Nick Fury was never a member of the Illuminati in the comics, but it wouldn't have been out of place maybe for him to have been. So Haley fills that function. So there's two others, and these are characters like Xavier who were in the Illuminati in the comic books. And one is not Ian Grofode. It is Reed Richards, and it's been recast as John Krasinski, who apparently has been a fan favorite to play Reed for a while. I've seen the leaked footage. Wanda, it looks like the evil version of Wanda from the multiverse, but it could be our Wanda. I'm not sure. She's not wearing the Scarlet Witch costume. Confronts them. So, you know, they're going to keep upping Wanda's power, obviously. That seems to be a direction they're going in, just like they went in the comics, which, again, that was Brian Michael Bendis idea, which I didn't care for at first. I still don't care for it in his context. The level of power is not the issue. But what Wanda did with the power and Wanda's sanity and the way it was dealt with, I thought was a sabotaging act of a long-time beloved character. Again, people much younger than me have only been reading these comic books for the last 15, 20 years of Marvel, which is the time I haven't been reading them, though I have kind of kept up peripherally. That's all they've ever known, is Wanda is the most powerful mutant. Wanda destroyed all the mutants, you know, made them blink out of existence. Wanda's crazy. Wanda had this, you know. Well, we explored all that in WandaVision. WandaVision was a beautiful summation of quite a few Wanda and Vision story arcs from across a large range of years, boiled down and distilled. And as Marvel MCU has proven at its best, when they do this, it's pretty amazing adaptation work. I thought WandaVision was such a vehicle. And obviously, they're going to continue with these themes with Wanda in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Her duality. I'm happy with that. I think Elizabeth Olsen is incredible, and I think no matter how they tamper with her sanity or have her do morally objectionable things from time to time or driven mad with power, I believe she's still my Wanda. I think there is a core character that is a very good woman and is very much the character that I grew up with. I feel that resonance, that's who Elizabeth Olsen is portraying, either of her own accord or her research or via her director. I mean, let's say Sam Raimi, of course, a longtime comic fan, would be very familiar with the various incarnations of Wanda dating back to the 1960s. So anyway, in this case, this leaked footage, she confronts the Illuminati. So Reed looks good. He's got the current beard, which has become kind of part of his look in the last maybe 15 years, 10, 15 years. Less so the white on the sides. So he's slightly younger. I mean, Grofode, they didn't want to give him more than this much white. I thought it's very odd. You know, they didn't want to make him terribly older than Sue, even though that was always a plot point. And even though Ian Grofode actually was fairly older than Jessica Alba, those movies are just a mess, in my opinion. Sorry, fans of those movies. But the look of Krasinski's costume is a wonderful balance between various looks. The blue color is perfect, the almost navy blue color. It's really the look that those costumes should have. Not shaded in off ways like on Grofode's suit, and not too candy-colored comic booky like in the Roger Corman Fantastic Four film, which I proudly own on DVD on bootleg, and by far it's the best of the four Fantastic Four feature films that have been made, in my opinion. Still, despite its many flaws and cheesy aspects, it's the closest adaptation. And that's important to me, as you guys know. I went on and on for hours about it on this last Doctor Strange video I did. Which, you know, must not have turned everybody off too much, because it's gotten like almost 400 views in a couple of weeks, and I'm grateful for that. But in the case of Reed, yeah, he looks good, and he's got some of the panels and rubbery parts, kind of like the Grofode version had, and kind of like a lot of Marvel costumes do, but not overly tons and tons of flaps and pieces which I think they've gotten out of control with a lot of that. A lot of their costumes, I think, are becoming over-designed. I know part of it is, to make things look impressive in the lighting, and that's always been the best reason. That's the reason the Sam Raimi Spider-Man had such a textured costume that was different than the plain one from the past, until they finally figured out a way to take the, kind of a more muted colored material, like in the Tom Holland iteration, especially his mask, giving him just kind of the flat red and black classic John Romita illustrated mask for Spider-Man live action at long last after 50, 60 years, and it's iconic, and it should be what's used, I think. But they had to kind of work that out, what kind of material they were going to use to get the best look. So from this not high definition leak clip, I think Reed looks great. Krasinski's a good actor. He's an okay comedian. I know people are going to be throwing things at the screen, like The Office rules, fuck you. I never cared for it. The British one I liked a little. I didn't like the American one. But I see his likability. And of course his profile raised quite a bit when he co-wrote, directed, and starred in A Quiet Place 1 and 2. I only saw the first one. It was quite a disappointment as a horror movie goes. I think it was vastly overhyped. Concept was okay. Krasinski, his acting was fine. Emily Blunt's acting, as always, was great. Direction was all right. But I'm glad it had people taking Krasinski serious. And as we've seen many times over the decades, people have been stereotyped as comedic actors and goofballs can, in their middle age, reinvent themselves very successfully as strong dramatic actors. We've seen that all the way back to Robin Williams, to Woody Harrelson, to Michael Keaton. There's numerous examples. Those are just some of my personal ones that come to mind, early ones. So I'm happy with that casting. I haven't heard him talk, but visually he's Reed, and I get that Reed probably is the leader of the Illuminati. That's the body language I'm giving based on the staging of the scene. So the fourth member is Black Bolt, who wasn't in the comic books in the Illuminati, with good reason. He is a singular, his is of a singular kind of race of beings, just as mutants are, similar to but very different than mutants, Inhumans. In this case, they did do an Ian Grofode, and they did bring back Anson Mount, who starred as Black Bolt on the short-lived, disastrous Inhumans TV series, which I saw about 5 of the 8 episodes it had before it was canned, and I had hopes for it. I tried to like it. Plot-wise, it was pretty damn faithful to the comics, and a few characters were somewhat on the money, but Black Bolt wasn't one of them. Mount did the best he could, though. Black Bolt without the mask and the antenna just doesn't work. And I know, masks seem troublesome, to go around wearing a mask all the time, blah, blah, blah. But, it worked with Daredevil for long scenes. With Charlie Cox, it's always worked with Steve Rogers. And you can see his eyes and most of his face. Same with Black Bolt's mask. Anson didn't wear a mask. He wore a strange leather outfit that had kind of a little break-off kind of dress, like a kilt part that was supposedly evocative of his underarm wings, glider wings, and then he had it was black, of course, black leather, of course, and then it had most of the iconic Kirby symbolism that's on Black Bolt's torso, though it didn't use all the ones that come all the way up here. So I can't really tell from this leak if all of that paneling is going to appear faithfully on the costume. It looks all black, or very, very, very dark blue, navy blue to the point of black, and it looks a little leather. His mask looks accurate. He doesn't look as cool as I was hoping he could look. But again, it might be how it's lit, how it's shot, how it's acted. And again, I'm assuming he, like Black Bolt in the comics and in the ABC show, will be mute. Now, of course, Black Bolt isn't really mute, but that's his major power. He has many powers. And one is that if he speaks too loudly, he'll fuck everything up. So he has a sonic blast. It makes banshees look like a little tiny whisper. He can level whole cities by just saying a word. That's an incredibly dramatic power. Black Bolt is one of Jack Kirby's most inspired, I think, and iconic creations. Because, you know, you see him, he's got a mask, he's got wings, Black Bolt, he sounds like an old school superhero like Blue Bolt. But he's evocative of that at first glance, just like Galactus at first glance looks like he has a superhero mask. But he's on a whole different level, and the fact that he's quiet makes him very, very inscrutable. And then things like the antenna powers, and the fact he has so many powers, and he's a king, and he's just a character that's really well conceived and well drawn at its best. And I particularly liked Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee's miniseries in the early 2000s called Inhumans. It certainly changed the game on Inhumans. It was brilliantly written and drawn, in my opinion. Slight redesigns of most of the characters, but not Black Bolt. He was too iconic. You can't touch Black Bolt. Something that ABC didn't get. And that series, though, a lot of it fed into that TV show and influenced depictions of the Inhumans going forward. There was a really nice spin-off comic book on the short-lived Tsunami sub-imprint on Marvel during the glorious Bill Jemas years called Inhumans, and it followed on from that Paul Jenkins series, but it concentrated on newer Inhumans who became exchange students, because, you know, they live on the moon, exchange students to Earth, as more humans became aware of the existence of Inhumans as a result of aftermath of these geopolitical events that happened in Paul Jenkins' series, which touched on Russia and introduced, well, she'd already been introduced, but I think it may be the same month she appeared in the Inhumans. Her introduction was in a mini-series of Black Widow, but also in this Inhuman series, Yelena Belova, the beloved new Black Widow, played by the ever-beloved Florence Pugh. She was a character who represented Russia's interest in this geopolitical problem with Attilan, and then, of course, Atlantis and Submariner are also included. And, of course, those kind of ideas have been folded in and out of Black Panther comics over the years, notably, I think, by Reginald Hudlin did quite a bit of this, and I guess Christopher Priest did quite a spy play between T'Challa being king of Wakanda and dealing with Namor as Prince of Atlantis and Doctor Doom as sovereign of Latveria. But that series dealt with the intersection with the Inhumans and Attilan. And, you know, because, it goes back and forth between when Attilan's on Earth to where it went to the moon. And, it's flown all over the place. It gets around for a whole city, an ancient city, and doesn't really fall apart. And I believe when they moved it to the moon in an old John Byrne Fantastic Four that, Black Bolt was the one who did most of the moving with this kind of electromagnetic thing that comes out of his antenna. I'm a huge Inhumans fan, can you tell? So it's good to see him in the movie. Fine to see Anson Mount. As long as Anson Mount can pull off the mask, I have no problem with the duplicate casting. It may or may not be the same Anson Mount Black Bolt that appears in the kind of now side universe that most of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. series and the Inhuman series take place in, because they're no longer canonical within the MCU, except perhaps the first two seasons or elements of the first two seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But from then off, it is another alternate universe, part of the multiverse. So is it that Black Bolt? Well, considering he has a mask and an accurate costume, I would say it's another alternate universe Black Bolt. Not the MCU, but another one. But, a lot of these variants look just alike, so Anson Mount being multiple variants, just like is perfectly plausible, just as going to happen with Wanda in this movie. Multiple played by Elizabeth Olsen. There's going to be at least 3 or 4 Doctor Stranges, all played by Cumberbatch. And as we saw in the Loki miniseries, there were at least a couple of variants played by Tom Hiddleston, but then there were quite a few that weren't. Quite a few variants depart, radically. So there could be, the Ian Grofode's Reed Richards technically does exist as one of the multiple endless variants of Reed Richards, just as John Krasinski is one from another universe, and I'm sure a lot of people are too, that if he does a good job, that an identical variant, it looks like John Krasinski will become the mainline MCU Reed Richards. Or that somehow this Reed Richards will cross universes and come to dwell in our universe. I'm not entirely unconvinced that the reason the major events surrounding the Fantastic Four and the X-Men and in the Marvel comic book continuity have not impacted the MCU yet are possibly because they are not native to the MCU. Possibilities are endless, right? We'll figure it out. Anyway, this is cool. I like this iteration of the Illuminati much more in the comic books. As with Civil War, they took, an okay concept, poorly executed by very cynical comic book writers, Millar and Bendis, and vastly improved them for the cinema version. Just as they did with Captain America Civil War, I'm hoping this is the Illuminati equivalent for the MCU for Doctor Strange. And then you're wondering, are they going to ask Doctor Strange to be? And Charles Xavier, even in the trailer, makes the comment, which Doctor Strange is he? So they may have had a Doctor Strange in the Illuminati who may or may not have resembled Benedict Cumberbatch, and we may or may not, ever see him. Their Illuminati Doctor Strange could have resembled Peter Hooten, So that's the newest news with Doctor Strange, and it's opening tomorrow evening, yes, but officially opening Friday on the 6th. Due to finances and the way it's been booked in my area, just the popularity of it, there's no way I'll be able to get to see it in its first week at either theater that I have decent access to. A channel patron, Tim Tolbert, said he is going to treat me to this, but he hasn't been able to as of yet. He's going to try to see it in a few days. It will be at least a week, if not 2 or 3 weeks. This happened with Black Panther too. By the time I got to where I was going to book an advance ticket, every showing at the theater a mile from my house for almost a month out was booked. So this is becoming more and more the norm. I mean, there was a time when I could do these and even see these on opening Thursdays. I saw Civil War that day. I saw Ragnarok that day. Some just the demands are too high. You start too late, and I don't really like the overcrowded theaters. Anyway, I'd rather be up in the balcony, pretty much by myself, like I was when I saw the Batman recently. So that's a little bit of Doctor Strange news. I'm sure everything else you know about Doctor Strange from the endless bombardment of marketing. So let me switch nodes here before we wrap this up. The other this week in the MCU bit from my side of things is the second half of the Moon Knight series on Disney Plus. I covered the first 3 episodes in this week in the MCU. Only a couple of days after that, the 4th episode dropped. And the 4th episode was kind of going forward with the plot as, I had set it out and the road we were seemingly on. And then Arthur Harrow shot and killed Mark Spector without his Moon Knight protective garb on. And You know, he was dead. People who know the Moon Knight mythology, as myself, I'm not an expert on that character as I am on many, but I know a good bit, and I've been learning even more of late. You know, he did indeed die, and of course, the whole thing is Khonshu can resurrect him. Well, Khonshu had been trapped away, squirreled away in this little idol, and his powers, you know, prevented from being used. So they killed Mark, so that was it, and Mark fell into the water. Next thing we know, we're in a kind of a David Lynchish situation where he awakens in a mental hospital that's festooned with all kinds of actors, characters, symbols from all these different elements of the series, but it's the decorum of this very sterile white asylum. And in the asylum, he and Steven have two separate corporeal bodies, and they're both patients slash prisoners there. This twist was pretty cool. I like the way it was done. I love it when a series just boom puts you somewhere completely different. You don't know what the hell's going on. The characters don't know what's going on, and you know, if done right, it can really add another dimension, and if tied up right, correctly, you know, accurately in an adequate fashion is what I'm trying to say. Then it definitely adds levels to an insight into the what you've accepted as come to accept as the mainline reality that you're dealing with. So now there was some question cast on what was real. So of course this is an ancient trope in storytelling. Episode 5 played this, as they said in Wild Bunch, played this string to its end. And it was pretty amazing. You had very vague flashes back to the reality where Mark Spector was shot and killed in front of his wife, Layla. It's really all about the experience of Mark and Steven within this realm, this dream, this reality, which is really an after death situation. They are indeed dead. And they decided to construct around this, which is really faithful to the comics, of what I said a minute ago. They constructed it around the Egyptian, you know, rituals of Egyptian mythology as pertaining to the afterlife. So we met a new Egyptian god, Tawarmat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right. She has a hippo head. I know. Apparently, that is a real Egyptian deity. Excuse me, that the writers of the show came upon and were inspired to use as the plot engine for this part of the story. I wasn't familiar with the being. I've never seen a picture of her that I know of. But we'd already seen human avatars for Osiris and Hathor, and you know, the big ones, Isis, and basically Ethan Harrow, Arthur Harris, you know, moving to annihilate all of them. And they weren't very helpful to Mark. They really didn't want to stop Harrow. They didn't believe Mark because Mark had mental health issues, and that Harrow used that against Mark to discredit him as a legitimate, authoritative avatar of Khonshu. Because all Harrow wanted to do all along was get Khonshu out of the way and also get revenge on Khonshu for using him when he was his original avatar. So episode 5 plays out as an origin story. You've already got the origin kind of for Moon Knight, how this guy became Moon Knight and why, what the purpose of Khonshu is in sending him out to help the travelers of the night. But here you get the origin, of Mark Spector, the physical being called Mark Spector, his childhood and his traumas, and what facilitated the creation of the Stephen Grant personality. And you realize that Stephen Grant has been with Mark since he was a child, you know, maybe a teenager or slightly younger. And a lot of this is from the comic books. It is established that Mark Spector and his father were Jewish. for some odd reason, early in the promotion of Moon Knight, it looked as though Mark Spector was not going to be a Jewish character, and that offended a lot of people who wanted Jewish representation. And then Alan Zellens, the writer who first came up with the idea that Mark Spector was Jewish, as a detail to his character, though later writers went way into the flashbacks, some of which are incorporated in episode 5. Alan Zellens, who is himself Jewish, was quoted as saying it didn't matter to him if they adapted him as Jewish. That wasn't the most important thing about his character. I mean, it may make it interesting or seemingly, obviously representative, or even seemingly paradoxical that a faithful Jew is now an emissary of a pagan deity, though they never go that route in talking about it in the show. And I would hope they would in the comics, but the way Marvel is, I don't know. Well, he is, and all this fretting was for nothing. And again, it is incidental to the plot. It's not like the whole episode stops and we have just this long discourse on the Torah. And we've got to give Mark his bar mitzvah and everything. And I'm not trying to sound stereotypical, but that is the reactionary stance that were taken by the people who were slagging on Alan Zellens, a fellow Jew. And, come on. When you're second guessing the authenticity of the creator of, it's like if Jack Kirby made Ben Grimm Jewish. Now, Jack Kirby never made Ben Grimm officially Jewish. I think it was kind of implicit, and Jack Kirby was Jewish. Well, if Jack Kirby had done that, and there's an FF movie, and they never mention that Ben Grimm's Jewish because it's not, he's not practicing, he's not orthodox, it's not endemic to the storyline, then should Jack Kirby get, beaten up over it? I don't think so. But some forms of representation are more readily apparent. If someone's black, that's obviously more immediately recognizable than their faith, or their sexuality, though those things can be easily gleaned as well, depending on how they're depicted. It just depends on how important you want to make those parts of their identity to the story you're telling. In my story, I consider all those elements. And they do have hierarchies depending on the story. If a character's black and it doesn't have immediate bearing on their function within the story, then I'm not going to smash you over the head that they're black. But then one of my major characters in Flicker Street is Ellinger, who is very much a latter-day revolutionary who is black and who is kind of, on one ideological level, an heir to the kind of work that was begun by people like Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and Fred Hampton. And so Ellinger being black is essential to Ellinger. So it's not something that's not going to be talked about or ignored. So this is the deal. They go into some of that, and you see a trauma, and the trauma, as I interpret it, is that Mark's mother was abusive. Mark's father was more of a kind, kind of forgiving, maybe too weak a husband, and a rabbi, I believe, was the implication, as he was in the comics, or at least he served a similar function. He wore a similar outfit. He had friends who were Hasidic with long beards, and everybody had the yarmulkes on. And I thought it was well done. The mom was the abuser, and the mom tried to destroy Mark, really. And I thought that was cool. Very timely with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing. There are men who are very passive and sensitive, and they can be bullied and hurt by their female lovers and wives. It's happened to me before, and they can obviously impact their children. So, this whole gender-specific kind of abuse thing, if one thing this trial with Depp and Heard is doing is hopefully on a mass scale dispelling that myth, that it's, all one way. when actually there are numerous nuances and valences depending on the individual parties involved and their relation to their personality and their trauma and how it manifests and how related it actually is to their gender and how much it's just who they are as people. And then when they assume gender roles like wife and mother, how does it disrupt those traditional roles? In Mark's family, it disrupted it a lot. So Stephen was created as the kind general withdrawing Mark. Mark had to be strong, though. Mark had to be strong for Stephen. It's like Mark is protecting Stephen because Stephen is the part of Mark that's been victimized. It all made total sense to me. A lot of this was not in the comic books, but it does fully flesh out the idea that he is a legitimate sufferer of DID. Whereas in the comic books, his multiple identities and DID status have kind of wavered depending on the story and the writer over the years. I knew they were going to try to clearly define it in these terms in the story, but I thought it was going to be more of Stephen was a way to hide Mark away from Khonshu or from Amit or something, an identity he took not known to himself and that he wasn't real. Well, what we find out is basically that Mark has spent years building lives of Stephen and Mark. And even though Mark never told Layla, his wife, who seems quite fond of Stephen, more so than of Mark, for good reason, Mark's secretiveness finally makes sense. It adds a dimension to his character. Stephen's character had the dimensions. Mark's character was a little bit implacable. And in the comic books, he was a little bit implacable as Mark Spector. Not as Moon Knight, per se, and not as, bold as his other personalities, but he was a stoic mercenary. Was he someone you were supposed to like or dislike? And that made him interesting. This one fills in a lot of those holes. So you see why Stephen is so passive and Mark is so violent. And of course, you see why Khonshu was attracted to Mark, but only tolerant of Stephen. And then you see how how Harrow played these gods, these avatars, against each other by using Stephen's mental illness, which is a pretty fucking dick thing to do, Ethan Hawke. So, in any case, for all the brilliance of that episode, Mark does make his way back to life through this process that's initiated by Tawaremet or whatever, the hippo goddess. In the next episode, we finally meet Amit, who's got an alligator head. I really liked her effects. They could have been all CGI. Both of these could have been all CGI, but they looked pretty practical. Tawaremet, I'm not saying it right. It looked kind of like a Muppet. Or, well, in this case, a Feeble, because one of the Feebles, Meet the Feebles being a parody of the Muppets, in a movie, amazingly, I've never reviewed on my channel. It was a giant hippo, and she was a parody of Miss Piggy in all her excess. So, well done. The visuals were nice. Tawaremet makes Layla an avatar of herself, and Layla kind of becomes this, avatar. She's got like this kind of costume, kind of like the old DC superheroine who had her own TV show in the 70s called Mighty Isis. The colorings are similar, and the parts of flesh that are exposed and are covered. And she has these golden steel wings. And much like Stephen embracing his Mr. Knight side, she kind of immediately figures out how to use these powers. And an little Egyptian girl says, "Are you an Egyptian superhero heroine?" And she's like, "Yes." And that was sweet. But anyway, Layla's a great character, very strong character, a very beautiful woman, and the actress, and a very likable character. A very good foil for Mark. And not just like romantic sexually. Obviously, that's part of their past. They've been married, but that's not at the forefront. It's really more the fact they know each other so long, they've worked together towards these common goals, in their fields in this whole crazy Egypt thing, but also the fact that he hid so many secrets from her, and now he feels he can tell her the truth. And Stephen is entrusting her with Stephen is, I think, his way of bringing her closer. All that having been said, Khonshu also comes back. The battles between Khonshu and Amit, the battles between the Egyptian superheroine Layla and Harrow's thugs, and even to an extent the battles between Moon Knight alternating with Mr. Knight, battling Ethan Harrow with his powerful staff, they're kind of predictable Marvel. I mean, the effects are better than some of these things are when they get near the end. They're not as rushed. They're more realistic, more artistic, because these are more artistic designs. We're talking, interesting takes on Egyptian gods, and of course, Moon Knight looks cool. Mr. Knight looks cool. But like most Marvel final act things, they are a lot of running, jumping, knocking each other across the place and breaking things, and no one really suffering much discernible damage with each blow, and occasional quips, and all happens so fast, and might makes right. And I was disappointed. I was disappointed with the lack of esotericism in the final battle, because they had all the elements there. They had three gods, Egyptian gods, all fascinating characters and interesting looking characters that were truly gods of a pantheon we have not in the MCU explored beyond seeing Bast at the beginning of Black Panther. We've really only been privy to the Asgardians, what they're really like, vice their as they're perceived by humans. And of course, some of that was discussed in the Eternals film, because that is a part of the Eternals comic book mythology. Them being confused with Greek and other gods and legends. So, and it's kind of like Mark is. I don't know. I mean, Mark. I guess he's happy at the end with Layla, and him and Steven, or I don't know. I mean, it is a resolution to this arc. I don't think it's a resolution to the whole story of Moon Knight, but it is. You do have a complete origin story. Where do you go from here? It's hard to say, because part of the deal to help Khonshu defeat Harrow and Amit was that he was going to release Mark and Stephen from his servitude as the Moon Knight. Now, he would still have the powers, apparently, but he would not be forced to be his fist, his protector of the travelers of the night. Who knows what direction that's going to go in? Obviously, an antagonistic, ongoing, sarcastic, and sometimes humorous dynamic between Mark and Khonshu is an essential part of the Moon Knight mythos, or at least has been since the late 1980s. It wasn't originally. But it is certainly now in the recent comic books. And a lot of the graphics of the recent comic books, including the designs of Khonshu, have been very faithfully rendered. They're very surreal and cool. I've gone over all that before. So I would say 6 is the weakest episode. It is disappointing. It's disappointing just because everything was dealt with and on an abridged schedule. For some reason, the main story was cut down to about 42 minutes. Not only the shortest episode, but the shortest Marvel finale in a while. Certainly shorter than those old Netflix ones. Like, I remember that one season of Luke Cage where, well, it wasn't even the finale. I think a penultimate episode of Luke Cage season 2 was like an hour and 15 minutes. And they just kept going until they were out of story, until they wanted to stop. Now, obviously, Disney Plus is more formulaic, and so don't be watching this and go, it's got to be 42 to 55 minutes, and then go watch Luke Cage and be like, why is one episode 50, one's an hour, one's 48? It's different model, a superior model, in my opinion, the Netflix one. But within this formula, it still seemed odd to a lot of fans that this was going to be the shortest one. And I don't know if the brevity was the problem. I mean, like I said, it was tied up. Amit was defeated, Hera was defeated, albeit with not a whole lot more insight into Hera. Hawk did fine. Amit was interesting, but a lot of it was really kind of last minute exposition about these are our purposes, which are really what you've known all along. Hera is weeding out the bad humans from the good humans, potential servants of Amit, to bring on this kind of, sea change in mankind and, basically kill the wrongdoers before they commit wrongdoing, whereas Khonshu is a god of vengeance. I will say this, though. The primary players, Oscar Isaac and F. Murray Abraham, and the actress, I can't remember her name, something Calumet, who played Layla, those performers and their performances and their characters have survived with dignity and integrity. So there we go. You've got Moon Knight. He's in the MCU, and there weren't any other direct connects to the MCU made other than the couple that have already been mentioned. But I don't know if we're in a rush to have a Moon Knight season 2 or not, especially if this episode is ill regarded. I'd be up for it if they could keep it ingenuous and not try to tie it all with a knot at the end. Now, that there are still open questions. The most major one is that we get more conclusive evidence of this kind of fan theory that's been circulating. You know how much I love them. Since they first go and wake up in the dream after death in the mental hospital, is that there's, another personality, and everyone's like, that's Jake Lockley, the cab driver. He's the third personality. He's going to be the toughest and meanest and save everybody. So as with so many of these fan bro speculations, absolutely zero of that happened. And there really wasn't any tangible evidence of it. Until near the end, in a desperate moment, Moon Knight, with his mask off. I hate it when they do that. I didn't think they were going to do it with Moon Knight, but of course. They had to contrive to take his mask off and show Oscar Isaacs. He set upon, and then this kind of flashing, weird editing with these sputtering black flashes, which denoted shifts between Stephen and Mark early in the series, happened, and it was not Stephen or Mark. And for the second time, Harrow or Khonshu one, I can't remember, comment that Mark, Stephen, and whoever else may be in there, Ethan hinted at it, before, and I think maybe it's Ethan being before his defeat, or maybe it was Khan. I don't remember. One of them basically reiterated that, and now there's like evidence. However, you didn't get any eyewitness accounts from anyone describing what this other personality was like, except they just basically just annihilated Harrow's men and made Harrow's defeat possible. I think he did defeat Harrow, actually, yeah, because he was kind of maybe about to lose. Is this Jake Lockley? Probably. Why is Jake Lockley so powerful and violent? What's his story? Is his story going to be like the comic books? And will there be a partner named Frenchie who has the helicopter? Frenchie's name is in his telephone index of phone numbers. So you never know. Possibilities are endless. I don't want to go over an hour, so let me just say, Moon Knight overall great series. Last episode, not as bad or disappointing as a lot of people feared. Not nearly as good as I'd hoped. Give it a shot. Go see Doctor Strange. I'll be there as soon as I can, and then we can talk about all of this Illuminati and multiverse and Doctor Strange stuff ad nauseum in another episode. So thanks for listening to me for a whole hour. Hope you learned something, and let me know what you think in the comments below, as Russell Brand says. about this MCU stuff. And please subscribe, and please like,